of New Era Shared Future. The China International Import Expo, the world's first large-scale expo to center on imports, kicked off Monday in Shanghai, China. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech at the opening ceremony and visited the country pavilion with Chinese and foreign leaders. The six-day expo has attracted more than 3,000 companies from over 130 countries and regions and over 150,000 buyers from home and abroad. Now, this expo has been branded as part of China's ongoing efforts to support economic globalization and trade liberalization. But is this vision shared by the international community and business professionals? What opportunities does the expo provide for international companies, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises? Can they also benefit from China's rapid rise and pace of development? I'm pleased to be joined by Arancha González, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Ms. Arancha González, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Last year, you used 3 S to describe China's Belt and Road Initiative, size, south, and scope. So, what words would you use to describe the China International Import Expo, and how do you see the connection between the Belt and Road Initiative and this Import Expo?
So I'm going to keep to the S's, but I'm going to use 3 new S's, because I think they build a bridge between the One Belt, One Road and the China Import Expo. One is share, because this fair is about creating a shared future. We know about exports. Countries export what they know to do best, but they also have to import, which is what this fair is about. And importing is what the world knows to do best. And at the end of the day, sharing means that trade is a win-win game. It's not one where some lose and some win, but one where everybody can win if we do it in the right way. The second word that I would use is sustainability. Sustainability, because we need to make sure that trade works for everybody, not just for the happy few, for the 1%. It also has to work for the 99%. And this is a lot to do with small and medium enterprises, which are a big focus for the International Trade Center, but which are also a big focus for the Expo. And the third S that I would like to mention is signal. What this Import Expo is about is a signal that China is sending that it wants to keep its doors open to the world, that it wants to make sure that it continues not only to be the factory of the world, but it becomes the market of the world, hence this focus on import. And again, this is a nice bridge between the import and the Belt and Road Initiative, hence these new 3 S's that apply very well to the two of them.
So, share, sustainability, and signal. Very interesting. And you also mentioned that China is transitioning from being the global factory to the global market. So, at this moment, where do you see China position itself in this transformation process? And after 40 years of reform and opening up, do you see this expo as a way of China trying to open a new door, maybe, to the outside world?
Well, China is certainly changing from probably doing manufacturing, very focused on exports, lower value added, into an economy that is more focused on services, that it is higher in value added, that is higher on skills, that is higher on intellectual content. That is the new economy that China is trying to build. And of course, that economy requires not only exporting, it also requires importing. You are only very strong at exporting if you are very strong at importing. The signal that China is giving is very good for China. But as it is good for China, it's good also for the rest of the world, because they can have a greater share in the Chinese market. At the end of the day, this goes in the direction of what was started 40 years ago with the opening up and reform policies of China. These are the two legs on which this economy has been standing, which now have to be adapted to the new realities of the fourth industrial revolution. So continue opening up, that's what this Import Expo is about, and continue reforming, which is also what is needed today to make the Chinese economy more competitive.
Yeah, at this moment, however, there are also this trend, this huge debate as to how we should conduct trade. Some countries are saying, no, we don't want free trade, or rather, while we're talking about free trade, we also want fair trade. And you know, I don't need to mention this trade friction that's happening between China and the United States. So given this big context, what's the significance of the CIIE, not only to China, but also to other countries?
I think to other countries it's very clear. It's an opportunity. Trade is about creating opportunities. This Import Expo is about creating opportunities. It's about allowing other partners, other countries, other companies of other sizes to come into this huge market called China. And through that, continue to demonstrate that trade can be win-win. But I say can be win-win, because in many cases it's not win-win, not because trade is not good, but because trade in many countries is not accompanied by domestic policies that will make sure that the benefits and the costs of trade opening are better distributed, are more equitably distributed. But this does not have to do with international trade. This has to do with the quality of the domestic policies in healthcare, in education, in taxation, in infrastructure. These are all the other policies that need to be made to work for trade to benefit not only the 1%, but also the 99%.
However, the thing is that people are kind of associating trade with the loss of their jobs. They're associating trade with being the victim of unfair competition from different countries, and they want to bring their factories back to their home country. They want to keep their jobs at their home country. So at this moment, what do you see a way forward? What would be the right way forward, and what is China's role here?
I think we have to do two things, basically. Every country has to do two things. One is to keep opening up their markets to greater competition, because competition equals competitiveness. When your companies are exposed to greater competition, they have to become tougher. Only the tougher survive. And the tougher means better salaries, better working conditions, better contribution to domestic growth. So we have to keep opening up, but we have to make sure that the rules of international trade are more adapted to the realities of today's economy. Today's economy is essentially more and more digitalized, but the rules of international trade have not kept pace with these changes. So the first thing we need to do is keep opening up, but keep reforming the rules of international trade to make them more relevant with the economy of the 21st century. And this essentially means a reform of the rules of the World Trade Organization.
What is happening there? Are you seeing the right signals coming out, or are we still in the area where we're looking for the right future?
So I think the signals are the right ones. For example, G20 trade ministers met in Argentina a month ago, and they signaled in a communique, they all subscribed, that the priority today is reform the rules of the WTO. Fine, but now we need to move into action. And this is where we have not yet seen much action. I think what China can do today is contribute to these reforms of the rules of international trade, together with other partners that are also very eager to move into this space. And this would mean for China, like for everybody else, making the right compromises and making the right contributions to this reform. Not because other countries are asking.
No, absolutely.
Because it is in China's interest.
Yeah. Do you see China's efforts? We've seen a series of efforts such as tariff reductions and such as this Import Expo. Do you see China picking up pace in doing exactly what you were talking about just now?
I think I see China taking steps to demonstrate that it is serious about continuing the opening up and the reforms that have worked for China in the last 40 years. But I think it's fair to say that probably the pace of these reforms and the pace of the opening up has to be speeded up. Why? Because the economy of the 21st century is moving faster than it was doing 40 years ago when Deng Xiaoping started this process. So today, the reforms and the opening up has to be higher and it has to be faster because the economy is moving at a faster pace. And this is true in China, as it is true in America, as it is true in Europe, as it is true in Africa, as it is true everywhere else in Asia. It is true in every country. And only those that do it and do it fast will become more competitive for the future. This is why it matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, President Xi Jinping just re-emphasized the importance of the private sector and also the importance of the many small and medium-sized enterprises who are contributing a lot to not just the tax revenue but also to employment and innovation. I know the ITC spends a lot of effort in this regard. You're also bringing in, I understand, 100 micro, small and medium-sized enterprises from about 20 countries and regions to participate in the International Import Expo. What's the consideration behind that, and how do you select these companies?
The consideration is that our economies, including China's economies, is 98% made of micro, small and medium enterprises. But not many of these companies participate in international trade. The big ones participate in international trade. And the big ones here, many of these big ones are big state-owned enterprises. They know how to participate in trade. But we need to make sure the smaller ones participate in trade, because when they do, they become stronger and they contribute more to the domestic growth. This is why I applaud President Xi Jinping's signal that the Chinese economy needs to care more about these small and medium enterprises and make them more innovative, more creative, more competitive, more productive. This is why we in the International Trade Center have made it our task to bring 100 micro, small and medium enterprises from 20 countries, Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, to come to the Shanghai Import Expo, for them to find new customers, for them to enter into this new market called China, and through that to become stronger.
Okay, this is only a sample or an effort, right, a trial. How can you, in the long term, encourage small and medium-sized enterprises or micro-enterprises to participate by themselves on this huge platform? I mean, China is going to import about $10 trillion of goods in the next 5 years. How are you going to help these companies equip themselves with the right tools to take advantage of that?
I mean, the first way would be to just simply showcase those that made it and succeeded, for them to serve as role models for the millions of others that, as you rightly say, could find a space in the next editions of the import expos that I hope China will continue to replicate. So showcase the examples of those that made it, but also generate tools, methodologies that will help all the others. This is what we're doing. Guides, practical guides that will tell an SME how to access the Chinese market. Survey the Chinese market to be able to tell medium, micro and small companies what tastes Chinese consumers have, what standards are required to export in this market, what procedures need to be followed. So tools and methodologies that will help replicate the successes that we hope we will see in this first edition. But you know, for us, what was important is to make sure that companies from countries that do not have necessarily the resources to participate in the Import Expo today would have that opportunity coming under the International Trade Center's umbrella. But once they see that this works, in my view, many more will join on their own.
Arancha González, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
As China rolls out the red carpet for international companies in its efforts to advocate free trade at the first ever China International Import Expo, some countries are doing the opposite. In the new trade agreement between the US, Mexico and Canada, a clause has been seen as a move by the US to stop Canada and Mexico from signing a potential free trade deal with the so-called non-market economies, or in other words, China. In 2017, Canada's exports to the U.S. accounted for 3/4 of the country's total exports, while its exports to China accounted for only 4%. How do Canadians view this new trade deal provision, and what impact might it have on trade relations between China and Canada? Also, as one of the 12 guests of honor at the China International Import Expo, how can Canada take advantage of the expo to expand trade diversification, and what areas of trade could be the most fruitful for both China and Canada? Earlier, I spoke to the Canadian ambassador to China, John McCallum, about his views on the CIIE and China-Canada trade relations.
To start with, as Canada and China have a long history of friendship, starting with Norman Bethune, Pierre Trudeau, recognition of China. Next year's the 50th anniversary, so we're building on that friendship. I was asked to leave the cabinet, come here to do more with China. So clearly our Prime Minister wants to do more on every front, and in trade and investment and relations overall. And so we have a major presence at the CIIE. We are one of the 12 countries of honor, I believe. We have some 20 companies in the pavilion and dozens in the business forum. And so we have a slogan, Canada, part of your healthy lifestyle, because I think Canada is well known for healthy food, and so part of what we sell is agriculture. We hope to do far more in that. But what Chinese people often don't know is that Canada is also an innovating country. We had 13 of the top 100 technological innovations. So we will have a lot of new clean tech products as well as our traditional areas. So we are hoping to make a big splash at this event in Shanghai.
So does that mean that you are actually attaching quite a bit of importance to this presence here in Shanghai? How do you see the significance of such an import expo in China in terms of bilateral trade and overall relations?
Well, the leader of our delegation at the Shanghai event is our agriculture minister, and he has 100 companies with him who want to do more business, so we are working hard on that front. We have no fewer than 6 federal ministers and 3 provincial premiers, and all of them have deals to make and causes to promote, so I think we are extremely active. We have our annual major economic forum, Economic and Financial Strategic Dialogue, and the Chinese and the Canadians are both enthusiastic to make great strides at that over those meetings, which are also in November.
Let's maybe look at the status quo of China-Canada economic and trade relationship at this moment. The figure for 2017 is that Canada imported from China some $55 billion of goods, and it exported to China around $19 billion. So apparently there is some kind of imbalance there. But first of all, help us break down the numbers. What are the biggest imports Canada take from China, and what are the biggest exports?
Well, obviously, as you just said, there's a bit of a trade imbalance there. But we are not like the United States. We don't make a huge issue out of that. We want to grow our trade. We want to export more to China, but we're not so hung up about a trade imbalance. But in terms of China...
Why you're not so hung up?
Well, because as an economist, I do not think that trade imbalances are an unnatural phenomenon. I think they arise for all sorts of macroeconomic reasons, so that is not usually the feature of a trade policy. It is in the case of the U.S. today, but that is very unusual. So in our case, we're not so focused on trade imbalance. We're more focused on growing our trade. And right now, our trade is largely resource products, agri-food, metals, some autos, but we want to diversify that and expand it. In terms of what we import from China, the short answer is just about everything. Across the board, electronics, apparel, toys, many items we import from China.
Yeah. Looking ahead, how do you see the trend growing in the next few years? Do you see exports leapfrogging tremendously with some efforts on both sides? Do you see importing continue to rise or stabilizing?
Well, I think the Chinese exports to Canada will take care of themselves. They're doing very well. What my principal focus is to grow the exports as quickly as we possibly can. We have an official target of doubling trade by 2025. I hope we can do it quicker. And I think some of the candidates for expanding exports are, as I said, in agriculture. We have a huge liquefied natural gas project, $40 billion investment. Much of that is coming to China. I think there could be more. So it is my hope that exports will grow fast on a wide variety of fronts.
Are you optimistic on meeting that goal faster than 2025? What are the challenges and what are the barriers you want to work on?
Well, I think the challenges are there are some impediments to entering the Chinese market. We all know that. There are some market barriers, some tariff barriers. The more that Chinese can open up their markets, the easier it will be for Canada and other countries to export. But I think there's a lot of goodwill on the Chinese side. I think they want to trade more with China. So I'm hopeful that those talks we're about to have will be productive.
In terms of trade and services, what kind of picture are we looking at? Are we looking at similar trend? I know the Chinese are traveling abroad a lot and increasingly, also studying in Canada.
I think the scope for increased tourism between Canada and China is enormous. Right now we have 700,000 Chinese tourists, but that's only 1 out of every 200. So we are saying we will double it very quickly, but we could quintuple it. We also, for many years, have had a strong banking and especially insurance companies in China, so those are also services. And we're doing more on the medical healthcare side. China, like many countries, has an aging population, and we can provide services to help take care of that aging population. So I think there are many areas in services where we can see a good scope for expansion.
So indeed, a lot of things that can be achieved, a lot of things that can be done, very bright prospects. And yet, in the very latest upgraded version of the North America trade agreement that is being called USMCA, I believe, there is this Article 3210, which has been termed as some kind of a poison pill. It says that entry by any party into a free trade agreement with a non-market country shall allow the other parties to terminate this agreement on 6 months' notice and replace this agreement with an agreement as between them. So although no name was named, but it is widely seen as targeting China, so which means if Canada, now a party to this revised NAFTA, if Canada wants to sign a trade agreement with China in the future, it has to tell the United States and Mexico, and probably if the U.S. does not approve, they have to scrap the trilateral trade agreement and enter into a bilateral trade agreement. What does it mean for Canada?
Well, we don't see this as a major issue. I know it's gotten a lot of attention, but there has always been a provision that any party to NAFTA can opt out, can withdraw on 6 months' notice. And that provision you just described, Canada managed to water it down substantially in the process of the negotiations. At the beginning it was much tougher. But so we are going full steam ahead, as I just said, in our discussions and negotiations with China in various sectors. I've mentioned agriculture, I've mentioned energy, I've mentioned tourism. We are doing all that, and the Chinese have shown great enthusiasm through conversations I've had, through our minister talking to Wang Yi. Both sides want to forge ahead. And I think as we do more...
But without the prospect of signing, of reaching a free trade agreement?
We can still do that, but I think, generally speaking, comprehensive free trade agreements take a long time to negotiate. Australia took 10 years to get its agreement. So I think what we can do in the short run is move forward with agreements in a number of sectors, like the ones I've just mentioned. And those will be the building blocks to an eventual comprehensive free trade agreement between China and Canada.
But will that mean that you have to get approval from the United States?
Well, we shall see. It depends when it happens. It depends who's the president. There are a lot of unknowns in that equation. But I will tell you that it doesn't impede us moving forward with China in many, many ways. And we have an undiminished enthusiasm to increase our ties with China, and we think we remain a sovereign country, and we will certainly do that.
Do you see the importance of China as a trade partner to Canada somehow catching up with that of the United States in the maybe longer-term future?
Well, yes. You know, we have a Department of Trade, a Ministry of Trade, and recently it changed its name, Ministry of Trade Diversification. So there's never been a better time to tell Canadians that now is the time to diversify our trade. We have so many eggs in one basket in terms of trade with the United States. Right. Something like 3/4 of our exports go to the United States. And so we clearly want to diversify, spread things out. And so the obvious candidate for primary diversification is China, the second biggest economy in the world. But we also have free trade agreement with Europe. We have a free trade agreement with Japan and other Asian countries. So we are working across the whole world for freer trade relationships.
Well, another item in the spotlight has been this WTO meeting that Canada was calling, but without the presence of China and the United States, and a statement came out of that. So what is the position of Canada in terms of multilateral trading regime and the reform of it, possibly?
Canada is immensely dependent on foreign trade. We're a relatively small country, 37 million people, hugely dependent on world trade. And so we want a stable international, rules-based international trading order. And China wants the same thing. Right. So that is one area where we will work with China to preserve and enhance the international rules-based trading system.
Personal question maybe to wrap up. I understand that one of your children actually speaks very good Chinese, even with a northeastern accent. How do you see the people-to-people exchange in its relationship to bilateral ties, and what can we expect for the next year as a tourism?
People-to-people ties are hugely important. And in my own family, I think I'm doing my bit on the people-to-people front, because my wife and I have 3 sons. And the oldest one got married last year to a Chinese woman. The second one got married in May of this year to a Chinese woman. Oh, wow. And the third and final son, and we won't have any more, got married in September. Guess what? To a Chinese woman. So I think my family is doing its bit on the people-to-people front, and I think that's a very important part of our relationship.
People have to interact and understand each other better.
Well, as I sometimes say, China may or may not be taking over the world, but they're doing a pretty good job on my family.
Thank you very much, Ambassador
McCallum.
McCallum.
Pleasure to talk.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.